welcome, take a slow breath and let the day fade away. Find a comfortable place to rest and allow the gentle sound of rain to guide you into calm. Tonight, you're invited into a quiet studio where painted windows soften the storm outside, and every moment is slow, warm, and safe. There's nothing you need to do. Just listen, relax, and let the window painter's studio in a storm carry you gently towards sleep. The window painter's studio in a storm. Before sleep arrives, the mind often wanders. Thoughts move in slow circles, revisiting moments, replaying conversations, imagining tomorrow. Tonight, there is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. You are allowed to rest. Imagine a quiet evening where the outside world has softened. Rain has begun to fall, not suddenly, not loudly, but with patience. Each drop meets the ground with care, creating a steady, comforting rhythm. The sound is gentle, familiar, like something you have always known. You are indoors. The air around you is warm and calm. A soft amber light glows nearby, low and steady, casting gentle shadows that stretch lazily across wooden floors and pale walls. Nothing here is sharp. Nothing demands attention. Everything feels unhurried. Somewhere close, tall windows face the night. Rain trails slowly down the glass, blurring the world beyond into flowing shapes and muted lights. Street lamps outside appear like distant stars, softened by water and distance. The storm does not feel wild or overwhelming. It feels protective, enclosing the space in quiet safety. As you breathe, your chest rises and falls naturally, in and out. Each breath loosens something inside you. The room carries faint, comforting scents. Clean rain drifting in through a cracked window, old wood warmed by time, the subtle trace of paint and paper resting peacefully. These are the scents of a place where creativity exists without pressure, where time is measured by light and shadow rather than clocks. This is a studio, a window painter's studio. Here, windows are not simply glass. They are gentle filters for the world outside. They soften harsh light, blur sharp edges, and turn storms into something soothing to watch. The painter who works here understands that not everything needs to be clear. Some things are better when they are softened. Outside, the storm settles into a steady rhythm. Rain taps lightly against the windows, each drop following its own slow path downward. The sound begins to blend with your breathing, guiding it into a calm, even pace. Nothing is expected of you here. You do not need to imagine every detail perfectly. Let the images arrive gently, the way sleep does. If your thoughts drift, that is fine. They can wander like reflections in rain-washed glass, appearing briefly before fading away. The studio waits quietly, filled with warmth, light, and calm. The storm continues its soft song outside, and the night stretches open, spacious and kind. You are safe, you are warm, You are ready to begin. The studio, the storm, and the quiet beginning. The storm had been arriving all evening, slowly, patiently, as though it knew there was no need to rush. Clouds gathered without drama, thick and calm, stretching across the sky like a soft blanket. When the first drops of rain finally fell, they did so gently, touching rooftops and pavements with care. At the edge of an old street, where the city's pace naturally softened, stood the window painter's studio. The street itself was narrow and slightly curved, the kind of place where footsteps slowed without conscious effort. Old brick buildings lined both sides, their surfaces darkened by years of weather, their windows glowing faintly behind curtains and blinds. Rain settled into the grooves of the cobblestones, collecting in shallow pools that reflected the warm light of street lamps. The studio sat quietly among them, neither hidden nor demanding attention. Its windows were tall and wide, framed by wood that had been smoothed by time and touch. Some panes were clear, others painted with translucent washes of color. Soft blues, pale golds, gentle silvers. Even from outside, the windows seemed to glow, as though they were holding light rather than simply reflecting it. Rain traced long, winding paths down the glass, each droplet moving at its own pace. Some merged together, some separated, some disappeared from view entirely. There was no pattern to follow, no need to understand it. The movement itself was enough. Inside, the studio was warm. The air held steady, neither too cool helping nor too warm. It felt balanced, calm, welcoming. A faint scent of rain drifted in through a slightly open window, mixing with the familiar smells of old wood, paper, and dried paint. The combination was comforting, grounding, like stepping into a place that remembered you. The floorboards creaked softly under slow footsteps, not loud, not sharp, but like a gentle acknowledgement of presence. The room was spacious without feeling empty, filled with long wooden tables, shelves lined with glass jars, folded cloths stacked neatly, and sketchbooks resting patiently where they had been left. Brushes stood upright in ceramic cups, their handles worn smooth. Some were thin and precise, others wide and soft, each one shaped by use and care. Nothing here felt new, yet nothing felt neglected. Everything existed in a state of quiet readiness. Near the center of the room stood the largest window. It faced the street directly, offering a view of rain-soaked pavement, glowing lamplight, and blurred reflections that shifted with every falling drop. The painter stood there now, unmoving, watching the storm through layers of glass and paint. They rested one hand lightly against the window frame, feeling the faint vibration of rain. The glass was cool beneath their fingertips, steady and solid. Outside, the storm continued its calm work, turning sharp edges into flowing shapes. This kind of weather was the painter's favorite. not because it inspired urgency, but because it removed it. Storms like this slowed the world down. They softened sounds, blurred distances, and gave permission to pause. No one expected quick replies on nights like these. No one rushed through streets unless they had to. The world itself seemed to breathe more slowly. The painter inhaled deeply. The breath came easily, without effort, filling the chest and then releasing just as naturally. With each exhale, tension loosened, shoulders lowering, jaw relaxing, thoughts growing quieter. A small iron stove sat against the far wall, its surface warm to the touch. On top of it, a kettle released soft curls of steam, the sound barely noticeable beneath the rain. The painter crossed the room and poured hot water into a waiting cup, adding tea leaves with practiced care. The scent deepened, earthy, soothing, familiar. They carried the cup back to the window and sat in a wooden chair that had shaped itself over years of use. The chair welcomed the painter easily, creaking once before settling into stillness. Outside, the storm continued. Rain fell steadily now, not hurried, not heavy. It drummed softly against the glass, creating a rhythm that felt almost musical. Each drop arrived, touched, and moved on, never lingering longer than necessary. The painted sections of the window transformed the scene. Where the glass was clear, the street appeared blurred but recognizable. Where the paint lay thin and translucent, the light shifted. Golden halos around lamps, silvery trails where reflections moved. The world beyond looked gentler through these layers, as though softened by intention. This was why the painter painted windows, not to hide the outside world, but to change the way it felt. They believed that clarity was not always kindness. Sometimes, the sharpness of reality could be softened without losing truth. A storm could remain a storm, even when seen through layers of calm color. The painter sipped their tea slowly, feeling warmth spread through their hands and chest. Steam rose upward, curling and dissolving into the air, much like thoughts that were no longer needed. The studio responded to the night. Lamplight grew warmer as darkness deepened outside. Shadows stretched lazily along the walls and floor, never abrupt, never startling. The painted windows scattered light gently, creating subtle patterns that shifted as rain continued its descent. There was no clock ticking loudly here. Time existed, but it did not insist on being measured. Moments stretched comfortably, allowing the painter to remain still without feeling idle. They watched the storm without trying to capture it. Some nights were for work, others were for witnessing. Tonight was for witnessing. Outside, a distant car passed slowly, its headlights briefly cutting through the rain before dissolving into reflection. The sound was muted, softened by water and glass, gone almost as soon as it arrived. The storm reclaimed the silence. The painter leaned back slightly, letting their shoulders rest against the chair. The steady rhythm of rain began to align with their breathing, inhale, exhale, until it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. The studio felt like a threshold, not fully separate from the world, yet protected from it. A place where the outside could be observed without being endured. A place where storms were welcomed, not feared. Painted windows glowed softly, holding the night in gentle layers. And as the storm continued its patient song, the studio settled deeper into calm, preparing quietly for the hours ahead, light moving through rain. As the night continued to deepen, the storm outside settled into a steady, reliable presence. The rain no longer felt like something arriving. It felt established, as though it had always been there, quietly doing its work. Each drop followed gravity without resistance, touching glass, stone, and earth with the same patient care. Inside the studio, warmth gathered gently. The painter rose from the chair without hurry, carrying the teacup back toward the work table. Their footsteps were slow and light, the kind that did not interrupt silence, but became part of it. The wooden floor responded softly, familiar with this movement, welcoming it. The work table stood beneath a hanging lamp, its light diffused through a fabric shade that softened every edge. On the table lay sheets of translucent paper, jars of pigment diluted to near water, brushes cleaned and resting. Nothing here felt unfinished. Everything felt paused. The painter selected a brush with natural ease. It was a wide, soft, bristled brush, its handle smooth from years of gentle grip. They dipped it lightly into a jar of pale blue pigment, barely tainting the water. When the brush lifted, a single drop fell back into the jar, rippling the surface once before settling again. The painter turned toward a side window, one not yet painted. Outside this window, the alley beyond the studio lay quiet and empty. Rain darkened the bricks, making them gleam softly. A single lamp glowed at the far end, its light reflected faintly on wet ground. The painter raised the brush and touched it to the glass. The motion was slow, almost meditative. The paint spread thinly, following the natural arc of the stroke. It did not obscure the view, only softened it, edges blurring slightly, light diffusing gently. Each stroke was deliberate but unforced. The painter allowed pauses between movements, watching how the pigment settled, how gravity influenced it, how the glass accepted it without resistance. There was no need to correct or refine. The paint knew where to go. Outside, the rain mirrored this movement, tracing its own lines down the glass. Paint and water existed together, layered but separate, each influencing how the other was perceived. The painter stepped back. Through the newly painted section, the alley transformed. The lamp's glow expanded into a soft halo, brick textures smoothed into gentle gradients. The world beyond felt quieter, more distant, yet still present. This was the comfort the painter sought. Not escape, but gentler seeing. They cleaned the brush slowly, rinsing it in a jar of clear water until the pigment faded completely. The water clouded briefly, then cleared again as the paint settled to the bottom. The painter placed the brush back among the others and returned to the chair by the main window. The storm continued its steady rhythm. Rain tapped lightly against the glass, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but never demanding attention. The sound filled the studio evenly, leaving no sharp silence behind it. The painter wrapped both hands around the teacup again. It had cooled slightly, but still offered warmth. They took a small sip and closed their eyes for a moment, listening. Rain, breath, stillness. The painted windows responded subtly as the storm shifted. Light moved across the floor in slow, drifting patterns. Shadows deepened and softened, stretching and retreating as if breathing. The studio felt alive in a quiet way, not active, not restless, simply present. The painter allowed their thoughts to wander gently. They thought of how people often hurried past windows without noticing them, how glass was seen as invisible unless it was dirty or broken. Yet windows shaped how the world entered a space. They decided what light looked like, how storms were experienced. Painted windows added intention to that experience. They offered rest to tired eyes. They softened evenings. They turned ordinary rain into something comforting. The painter believed that was enough. Outside, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. It was low and far away, more like a reminder than a disruption. The sound passed through the rain, through the glass, arriving in the studio as a gentle vibration rather than a noise. The painter did not startle. They welcomed it as part of the storm's language. The rain continued, unbothered. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer. Time was no longer measured clearly. The studio existed in a kind of extended moment, where each second flowed easily into the next. The painter shifted slightly in the chair, finding a more comfortable position. Their body felt heavy in the best way, relaxed, supported, grounded. Muscles released without instruction. They watched the rain trail down the largest window. Some droplets moved quickly, others hesitated, gathering mass before releasing. Some paths overlapped, creating brief intersections before separating again. None of it felt chaotic. Everything followed its own calm logic. The painter found this deeply soothing. They thought of how overthinking often came from trying to control motion, to force clarity where softness was needed. Watching the rain reminded them that movement did not need guidance to be beautiful. It only needed space. The lamp flickered once as the storm shifted outside, then steadied again. The painter noticed without concern. The studio felt protected, held within thick walls and calm intention. The painted windows glowed gently now, colors deepening as the night darkened. Pale blues leaned toward silver. Warm ambers softened into honeyed gold. The layers blended seamlessly, creating an atmosphere that felt timeless. The painter set the teacup down and rested their hands loosely in their lap. Their breathing slowed further, deep and even. With each exhale, thoughts dissolved before fully forming. There was nothing left to consider, nothing left to plan. The storm had taken over the work of holding attention. Outside, rain continued to wash the city clean. Inside, calm settled deeper. The studio felt like a quiet pocket in time, untouched by urgency, insulated from noise, existing solely to offer rest. And as the rain kept falling steady and kind, the painter remained there, watching, breathing, and allowing the night to carry them gently forward. The painter remained seated by the window, not because they needed rest, but because the chair had become part of the stillness. It supported them in the same quiet way the storm supported the night, without asking, without shifting, without interruption. Outside, rain began to fall in slightly finer drops, as if the storm had decided to speak more softly. The sound changed almost imperceptibly. Where it had once tapped with gentle certainty, it now whispered, sliding across the glass in thin, continuous threads. The painter noticed this shift without naming it. They had learned that the most calming moments were the ones that didn't demand recognition. Moments that simply happened and passed and left behind a subtle sense of ease. The studio absorbed the change. Painted windows softened the quieter rain even further, turning the outside world into a moving watercolor. The painter watched as light from a distant window across the street blurred into a pale oval, gently pulsing as rain passed in front of it. Nothing in the scene felt sharp enough to hold on to. That was the comfort. The painter stood again slowly and walked toward a shelf lined with small glass jars. Each jar held a different pigment, diluted and ready. None were bright, none were bold. Every color existed somewhere between memory and suggestion. They selected a jar of warm gray, almost beige, almost silver. Carrying it carefully, they returned to another window, smaller than the others, tucked beside a narrow door. This window faced a quiet courtyard where rain pooled between stones, forming shallow mirrors. The painter dipped the brush lightly. This time, they did not paint lines or shapes. Instead, they let the brush hover near the glass, barely touching it, allowing the paint to spread in its own time. Gravity guided it downward, creating faint, uneven trails that echoed the rain outside. The painter stepped back, then closer again, adjusting nothing. They trusted the process. Through the newly painted glass, the courtyard transformed, reflections softened, the surface of pooled rain looked deeper, calmer, almost endless. The world beyond felt more distant, yet strangely more intimate. The painter felt a familiar warmth in their chest, not excitement, not pride, but quiet satisfaction. They believed this kind of work mattered, not loudly, not visibly, but gently. They cleaned the brush again, slower this time, watching how the pigment faded from the bristles. The water grew cloudy, then clear. Everything returned to stillness. The painter returned the jar to the shelf and stood for a moment in the center of the room. From here, all the windows were visible. Each one held a slightly different version of the storm. Some softened light, some blurred motion, some deepened color. Together, they created a layered experience of the night. One storm, many perspectives. The painter breathed deeply, in and out. They noticed how their thoughts no longer arrived in full sentences. Instead, they came as impressions, sensations, a sense of warmth, a feeling of being held. The storm outside continued its slow conversation with the city. Somewhere far away, a door closed. Somewhere else, a light switched off. These sounds reached the studio only as softened echoes, stripped of urgency. Rain remained the dominant voice. The painter returned to the chair once more, this time pulling a folded blanket over their legs. The fabric was heavy enough to feel grounding, light enough not to restrict movement. They settled back, allowing their body to fully relax. The painted windows now glowed steadily, no longer shifting dramatically. The storm had found its balance, and the studio mirrored it. Everything felt synchronized: rain, breath, light, and stillness. Minutes drifted by unnoticed. The painter's eyelids grew heavier, though they did not fully close them. Watching the rain through painted glass required no focus, no effort. The scene held itself. They thought, briefly, of how many people struggled to rest, not because they lacked time, but because their minds remained too sharp, too alert. The painter wished they could offer everyone a window like these, something to soften the world, just enough. The thought drifted away before becoming heavy. The storm continued to fall. The studio remained warm, and part two of the night unfolded slowly, patiently, without asking for attention, only offering calm. Windows that remember quiet. As the night continued its slow, careful unfolding, the storm no longer felt like an event. It had become a presence, steady, reliable, familiar. Rain fell with the same gentle patience it had carried all evening, touching the world without urgency, without force. Inside the studio, the painter remained wrapped in stillness. The blanket rested comfortably across their legs, its weight reassuring, like a gentle reminder that the body was supported. The chair no longer creaked. It had settled completely, as though it too had found the perfect position for rest. painted windows surrounded the room, each holding its own version of the night. Some softened the glow of street lamps into pale halos. Others blurred distant shapes until they became nothing more than movement and light. One window near the corner reflected the interior softly, layering the painter's quiet silhouette over the rain beyond. The painter noticed this reflection. It did not feel strange to see themselves merged with the storm. It felt natural, as though the boundary between inside and outside had thinned, not disappeared, but softened. The world beyond the glass no longer felt separate from the calm within the studio. They breathed slowly, in and out. The storm seemed to respond, maintaining its gentle rhythm. The painter's thoughts drifted again, this time toward the windows themselves, not as objects, but as witnesses. Each window in the studio had observed countless moments like this one. Nights of rain, mornings of soft light, quiet afternoons where dust floated lazily through sunbeams. Windows remembered without holding. They did not cling to moments. They allowed everything to pass through them, light, shadow, weather, time. Perhaps that was their quiet lesson. The painter found comfort in that idea. They had spent years learning how to apply paint lightly enough that it enhanced rather than obscured, how to trust translucence, how to let go of control and allow light to do the work. This approach had shaped more than their craft. It had shaped how they moved through the world. They no longer rushed conversations. They no longer forced decisions. They allowed things to settle naturally, trusting that clarity often arrived after softness, not before. The storm outside embodied this philosophy perfectly. Rain did not argue with gravity. It followed it gently. It did not resist the glass or the ground. It touched, flowed, and moved on. The painter closed their eyes for a moment, letting this understanding sink deeper, not as a thought, but as a feeling. Warmth spread through their chest, steady and quiet. The studio held that warmth easily. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed faintly. The sound arrived softened, stretched thin by rain and space. It did not announce the hour loudly. It merely suggested that time was still moving, even if it no longer mattered here. The painter did not count the chimes. They opened their eyes again and looked toward an older window on the far wall. This one had been painted many years ago. Its colors were faded now, pale blue layered over silver, washed so thin they seemed like part of the glass itself. The paint no longer announced its presence. It simply existed, inseparable from the window. Through it, the storm looked especially gentle. Rain became almost mist, like its motion slowed even further. Light lost its edges entirely, becoming a soft glow without source. The painter stood slowly and approached this window. Their steps were careful, but not cautious. There was no risk here. The studio felt entirely safe. Each footstep landed quietly, respectfully, as though the floor appreciated the gentleness. They placed a hand on the window frame. The wood was smooth, warmed slightly by the room. The glass beneath their fingertips felt cool, steady, alive with faint vibration from the rain. This window held memory. Not specific moments, not stories, but a sense of continuity. It had been here through many seasons, many storms, many nights when the world outside felt heavy and the studio offered rest. The painter leaned their forehead lightly against the frame, closing their eyes again. They did not think about the past in detail. Instead, they felt gratitude for all the quiet evenings that had shaped them. The ones where nothing dramatic happened, yet something inside softened a little more. These were the moments that mattered most. The storm continued. Rain traced familiar paths down the glass, though never the same ones twice. Some droplets lingered briefly, catching light before releasing and joining others below. The painter returned to the chair, feeling no rush. They noticed how deeply relaxed their body had become. Muscles felt loose, supported. Breathing required no conscious effort. Even their hands rested open, palms warm and still. The studio existed now in a kind of suspended calm. Light was low but steady. Shadows remained gentle, never shifting abruptly. The painted windows filtered everything until the room felt wrapped in softness. The painter allowed themselves to reflect on why this space felt so healing. It was not because it was quiet alone. Silence, by itself, could feel empty. This calm came from balance, from sound softened rather than removed, from light filtered rather than extinguished. The storm played its part perfectly. Rain provided continuity. It filled space without overwhelming it. It masked harsh noises while offering a rhythm that grounded the mind. The painter realized that this rhythm had slowly guided their thoughts into rest. There were no lingering worries, no looping ideas. Anything that tried to form drifted away before becoming heavy. This was what rest truly felt like. Not sleep yet, but the space that welcomed it. The painter shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket, then settled again. Outside, the rain began to fall even more evenly, as though the storm had reached its most balanced state. Not stronger, not weaker, just consistent. The windows glowed faintly in response. Colors blended further, losing distinction until they became one continuous atmosphere rather than separate tones. The studio felt less like a room and more like a feeling warm, enclosed, safe. The painter's eyelids grew heavier. They did not resist this. There was no need to stay awake, no task remaining, no thought worth holding on to. The studio would remain whether they slept or not. The storm would continue its gentle work regardless. The painter let their head rest back against the chair, eyes half closed now. The The rain's rhythm moved through them, steady and reassuring. Everything had slowed, everything had softened, and the night, patient and kind, continued to carry the painter and the studio deeper into calm. Windows that remember quiet. The painter stayed where they were, not because they had chosen to, but because movement no longer felt necessary. The body had settled into a quiet agreement with the space around it. Chair, floor, walls, and air all worked together to support stillness. The storm outside seemed to understand this agreement. Rain continued to fall with unbroken patience, no louder and no softer than before. Each drop arrived as gently as the last, creating a continuous sound that no longer registered as individual impacts, but as a single soothing presence. It was the kind of sound that wrapped itself around thoughts and slowly loosened them. The painter's breathing became so effortless that it felt as though the body was breathing on its own. There was no need to guide it. The chest rose and fell in a smooth, unhurried rhythm, matching the steady pattern of the rain. In this state, even awareness softened. The painter was aware of warmth without thinking about temperature, aware of comfort without naming it, aware of safety without needing reassurance. These feelings existed quietly, like a background glow that never flickered. Painted windows continued to hold the night gently. The glass no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a lens through which the world became kinder. Outside, rain blurred rooftops, trees, and distant buildings into simple shapes and tones. Inside, those softened shapes became part of the studio's calm atmosphere. The painter realized that the windows were doing what they themselves had learned to do over time. They were filtering experience, not rejecting it, not controlling it, simply allowing it to pass through in a gentler form. This realization did not arrive as a thought, but as a deep sense of rightness, as if something important had been remembered rather than discovered. The painter's hands rested loosely, fingers slightly curled, palms open. There was no tension left in them. Even the smallest muscles had released their hold. The blanket across their legs felt heavier now, not because it had changed, but because the body had settled more deeply into gravity. The weight was reassuring, anchoring them gently to the present moment. The studio remained perfectly quiet, yet not silent. Rain filled the space between sounds. It smoothed the edges of everything else. Even the occasional distant noise from the city arrived softened, transformed into something that could not disturb. The painter's eyelids drifted closed for longer stretches now. When they opened again, the world appeared slightly dimmer, as though the eyes themselves were learning how to rest. Painted colors seemed to blend even more, becoming less distinct, more atmospheric. Time lost its shape. Minutes and moments were no longer separate. Everything flowed together in a continuous, calm experience. The painter felt themselves drifting, not into sleep, but into a deeper layer of rest, a place where the mind no longer searched for meaning or direction, where awareness existed without effort. This was the quiet core of the night. The storm outside continued faithfully, unchanged. Rain did not grow tired. It did not rush toward an ending. It simply existed, providing a steady rhythm that allowed everything else to slow. The painter thought, dimly, of how rare this kind of rest was in the waking world. How often minds stayed alert even when bodies were tired. How often silence felt uncomfortable because it left space for thoughts to echo. But here, there was no echo. The storm filled every corner gently, leaving no room for sharpness. The studio absorbed and softened everything, offering a sense of being held rather than enclosed. The painter's head leaned back fully now, resting against the chair. Their neck relaxed completely, supported without effort. Shoulders dropped just a little more, settling into their natural position. Breathing remained slow and even. In, out. The rain outside seemed almost closer now. Not louder, but more present. As though it had moved from the windows into the very structure of the building, humming quietly through wood and stone. The painter did not resist this sensation. They welcomed it, allowing themselves to sink further into calm. Thoughts no longer formed words. They appeared as soft impressions, then faded before taking shape. Nothing stayed long enough to matter. The windows continued to glow faintly, holding the night in layers of softened light. The storm continued its gentle work. The studio remained warm and steady, and within this carefully held space, the painter rested deeply, fully supported, fully safe, fully at ease. While part 3 of the night stretched on, unhurried, peaceful, and complete in its quiet unfolding, the studio had settled into a rhythm that matched the storm outside. Rain fell steadily now, soft and deliberate, a continuous chorus that filled every corner of the room without ever overwhelming it. The sound was consistent, yet it shifted subtly, as though the storm itself were breathing alongside the painter. Each drop traced its path down the glass with quiet assurance, some merging, some separating, some lingering for a moment longer before continuing its journey. The painter moved slowly to the central window, the largest in the studio, where painted layers of pale blues and muted amber glimmered under the streetlight beyond. They didn't approach it as a task, nor as a necessity. Instead, it was a kind of ritual, an acknowledgement that the world outside was softened by light, rain, and perspective. Each layer of paint offered a new lens, a subtle shift in perception. The pale blue softened the cold reflection of the wet street. Amber tones warmed the scattered light, transforming puddles into glowing pools. Even the shadows seemed to yield, under this gentle composition, dissolving into shapes that invited rest rather than attention. The painter rested a hand lightly on the frame, feeling the coolness of glass through the touch. Their palm tingled slightly from the contrast of warmth inside and the moisture outside, but it was a welcome sensation. It reminded them of balance, how the world could carry extremes with gentle care when one simply allowed them to exist side by side. They breathed slowly, deliberately, inhaling. They drew the quiet of the studio deep into their chest. Exhaling, they released any subtle tension that lingered in shoulders, jaw, and spine. Each breath seemed to resonate with the rhythm of rain, extending the storm's calm into every part of the body. The painter stepped back and observed the window from a short distance. The combination of painted glass, dim interior light, and storm outside created an effect almost like a living painting. Shapes shimmered, colors shifted slightly, and yet nothing demanded recognition. Everything simply existed, moving in slow, patient harmony. The studio itself seemed to breathe along with the storm. The walls absorbed sound and returned it softened. The floor held warmth from the day's sun, now mingled with the cool, damp scent drifting through the slightly open window. Lamps glowed softly, scattering gentle circles of light across surfaces, while shadows stretched lazily, dissolving edges into fluid patterns. Every corner of the room contributed to a sense of calm, so complete it felt almost sacred. Even the shelves, lined with jars of pigment, brushes, and folded cloth, seemed still and purposeful, quiet participants in the orchestration of rest. The painter had always appreciated the studio's subtle energy, not the materials themselves, but the quiet life that persisted between work and pause, between light and shadow, between rain and glass. Sitting again near the largest window, the painter drew the blanket over their shoulders. It was heavy enough to offer comfort, light enough to avoid restriction. They wrapped their hands around a teacup of warm tea, feeling the liquid heat seep slowly into their palms. Steam rose from the cup, curling upward in delicate spirals before vanishing into the air, merging with the scent of rain, wood, and pigment. Through the painted glass, the rain shifted. Each drop traveled its own path. Some merged with others, forming gentle rivers across the panes. Some paused, clinging for a moment before continuing downward. The painter watched, not to control, not to observe critically, but simply to witness the quiet persistence of the storm. It became easy to forget the boundary between observer and observed. The painter felt as though they, the studio, and the rain were part of the same gentle movement. Outside, distant lights reflected in puddles, blurred into halos by the painted glass. Trees swayed with minimal effort in the mild wind, their leaves catching drops and releasing them in slow, steady rhythm. The city beyond seemed paused, softened by both rain and distance. It was a world that existed, but it did not demand attention. The storm had filtered it into comfort. The painter's eyes closed briefly. They felt their body sink deeper into the chair, supported by the cushion and blanket. Breath followed the rhythm of rain, steady and unhurried. In, out, in, out. Each exhale carried a little more tension, a little more lingering thought, away from the mind and into the forgiving space of the studio. After a moment, the painter opened their eyes again and looked at another window, one painted in subtle silver and pale blue, older than the others. Its layers were delicate, almost imperceptible now, yet they held decades of storms and light and quiet nights. Through it, the rain looked dreamlike, each droplet caught in the layers of paint and refracted into soft, shifting patterns. It was a view both distant and intimate. The painter thought, without thinking too hard, about the gentle persistence of small things, a brushstroke that survived years, a window that remembered storms, a room that held the warmth of previous nights. They realized that calm was cumulative. That care applied in small, consistent ways could create a space so restorative it touched both body and mind. The chair welcomed the painter fully now, blanket snugged, tea gone or cooling in the cup, hands resting in lap. Every muscle had released. The air was steady, the storm reliable, the painted glass glowing softly. Nothing required motion. Nothing demanded decision. Even the mind had begun to drift into a slow, quiet rhythm, no longer constructing sentences or narratives, but feeling space, warmth, light, and sound in simple, unbroken awareness. Outside, the storm softened slightly, rain falling in even lines now, whispering across the glass rather than striking it. Each drop caught a little lamplight and scattered it into the room, creating faint, moving reflections that shifted slowly across walls and floor. Even these patterns contributed to calm, never abrupt, never demanding, always gradual and soothing. The painter tilted their head back, eyes closed again, sinking into the chair as though the studio and the storm were holding them upright. Every breath was a wave, every exhale a gentle release. Warmth filled the chest and spread through the arms and legs. Muscles had forgotten tension entirely. Thoughts had forgotten urgency entirely. This was the deepest calm, here in the studio, surrounded by painted glass and steady rain. The painter rested completely. The storm outside continued its patient, tireless work. The light inside glowed steadily, shadows lay softened and unthreatening. Everything existed together in gentle harmony, and in this space, a sense of gentle resolution settled the storm and studio. The painter and the world, all connected by patience, softness, and the quiet knowledge that everything could exist without needing to be fixed. The painter remained seated, still enveloped in the blanket, hands resting lightly in the lap. The storm outside had softened into a quiet lull, rain falling evenly, almost meditative, like a gentle drumbeat that neither rushed nor paused. Even the faint wind had become a tender companion, brushing leaves outside the studio window with mild, almost imperceptible motion. Through the largest window, the world appeared almost like a painting now. Street lamps glowed in soft halos, their reflections pooling in puddles along the rain-darkened pavement. Buildings blurred, their edges softened, and even distant movement seemed muted, almost reverent, as though the storm had asked the city to slow down, to exist more quietly. The painter's eyes drifted over this scene, not to analyze it, not to capture it, but to simply absorb it. Colors, shapes, and light blended into a gentle mosaic, soft and forgiving. Each droplet sliding down the glass mirrored the mind's own release, taking with it the small frictions of the day, brief worries, lingering thoughts, unfinished mental threads. The studio itself responded to this rhythm. Painted windows glowed faintly in the ambient light, holding the storm at bay, softening its reflections, offering layers of calm. Shadows shifted slowly across walls and floor, elongated and stretched, but never abrupt. Even the furniture seemed to breathe slightly, settling into the night's pace. The painter tilted their head back, resting fully against the chair. Their eyes were half closed, heavy, and yet the mind remained alert enough to notice details in the room. The gentle shimmer of a brush handle, the subtle texture of paint-stained wood, the soft curl of steam from the teacup that had now cooled. Outside, rain continued, steady and constant. Each drop moved independently, yet collectively they created a rhythm that mirrored the painter's slow, deliberate breathing, inhaling, exhaling, the body aligned with the storm, and in this alignment, a quiet peace settled deeper. The painter reflected gently on the way small actions shaped this space. A brush dipped lightly in pigment, a careful stroke on glass, a lamp left on at just the right glow, a blanket draped across a lap. These tiny gestures combined into a sanctuary, a studio that did not demand, a storm that did not frighten, a world softened just enough to be held comfortably. They leaned their heads slightly to one side, resting it near the painted window pane. The glass was cool, comforting against the warmth of the studio. Outside, the rain blurred reflections, creating trails of light and shadow that shifted slowly, endlessly. The painter noticed the harmony in these movements, how nothing needed to be corrected, how nothing needed attention. Everything simply existed, fluid and gentle. The blanket settled more fully around their legs, weight evenly distributed. Grounding the painter to the chair, they closed their eyes completely, letting the sounds of the storm, the soft hum of lamps, and the faint scent of rain, wood, and pigment carry them further into quiet. Thoughts no longer arrived as words. They came as impressions, fleeting warmth, subtle light, the delicate brush of air across skin. Even the distinction between self and environment softened. The studio, the storm, the painter, and the rain were all part of the same quiet flow. Time no longer mattered. Minutes stretched like the gentle curves of light on wet streets. The rhythm of the storm and the rhythm of breath merged into a single cadence. In this unity, the painter felt a profound sense of resolution. Everything was as it should be, nothing needed fixing, and yet everything continued to move, to change, to exist softly and without urgency. The painter allowed a small smile, almost imperceptible, to curve their lips. It was not happiness in the conventional sense. It was gratitude. It was recognition of the gentle continuity of life, of quiet nights, of storms that brought calm rather than chaos. Outside, the storm remained constant but subdued. Its song was steady, a lullaby of droplets against glass, of water pooling and flowing, of distant wind weaving through trees. The city beyond the studio appeared suspended in gentle reverence, softened by rain and distance, while inside warmth, light, and calm coexisted without interruption. The painter's breathing grew even slower. Each exhale was longer, carrying away residual tension. Each inhale was full, welcoming the quiet into the lungs, into the chest, into the core of being. The blanket held them in perfect comfort. The chair cradled them fully. The painted windows glowed softly, capturing the storm's reflection without distortion. In this moment, the painter realized something essential: peace was cumulative. It was built not in a single grand gesture, but in hundreds of small, consistent acts of care, observation, and stillness. The storm, the windows, the studio, the quiet, all were part of that accumulation, holding the painter in a gentle, unbroken embrace. The mind, too, had softened. There were no lingering loops, no repeated worries. Awareness remained, but it was light, diffuse, and non-demanding. Even the edge of consciousness felt comfortable, like the softest pillow or the faintest glow at the edge of vision. The painter leaned fully back once more, allowing the studio and storm to hold them completely. The rain continued. The windows glowed, shadows drifted, and time, though present, was no longer needed. Everything was exactly as it should be, and in this sustained stillness, in this gentle harmony of storm, studio, and self, part 4 of the night reached its deepest, most soothing resolution, a space perfectly prepared for the final drift towards sleep. Drifting into dreams, the studio had become a cocoon. Rain fell steadily outside, a constant, gentle presence, its sound soft and rhythmical. The painted windows blurred the world into a moving watercolor, each droplet altering light and shadow just enough to keep the scene alive, yet entirely soothing. The painter sat quietly, legs wrapped in the blanket, hands resting loosely in their lap. They no longer needed the teacup of tea. Its warmth had already traveled through the body, settling in the chest and hands, leaving a lingering calm. The chair had molded to the shape of their body over the years, now cradling every curve, supporting every sigh of relaxation. Through the largest window, the city appeared far away. The street lamps glowed in soft halos, reflected in puddles of water that trembled slightly with the wind. Trees swayed just enough to create a rhythm with the rain, leaves dripping in unison. Everything moved, but nothing disturbed the painter's quiet state. Eyes half closed, the painter leaned slightly forward, then back, feeling the weight of the blanket, the smooth coolness of glass through fingertips, the faint warmth of the lamp overhead. Every sensation was gentle, confirming the stillness, grounding the mind. The storm continued to fall in soft, measured lines. Each drop slid down glass and pooled briefly before vanishing. The painter watched without expectation, letting the slow, natural motion enter the body, inhaling with the rhythm of rain, exhaling with the rhythm of clouds. Shadows on the walls shifted, moving with the subtle curves of light refracted through painted glass. Each shadow stretched and softened, never abrupt, never jagged. Even the edges of the studio seemed blurred, making the entire room feel like part of the storm itself, a safe, quiet extension of the night outside. The painter closed their eyes fully this time. Breath deepened naturally, each exhale longer, each inhale easier. Muscles had released completely. Shoulders dropped, jaw relaxed, fingers relaxed. Even the small muscles in the feet and calves seemed to surrender to gravity, letting the chair and floor take their weight without effort. In the mind, thoughts floated like gentle clouds. They appeared briefly, then faded before forming words. No urgency, no need to focus, no tension. Only awareness, soft and diffuse, carried by rhythm of breath and rain. The painted windows continued to work their quiet magic. Blues and ambers mixed with silver, layering the night into a soft mosaic. Light was everywhere and nowhere, refracted and softened into shapes that invited rest. The painter imagined each brushstroke had memory, each layer of paint holding the calm of countless nights like this one. Somewhere far away, the city moved on. Doors closed. Distant traffic hummed, lights flickered. None of it intruded. The storm filtered everything into something peaceful, gentle, and protective. It wrapped the world in soft vibration, carrying a subtle reassurance. Everything was safe. Everything was right now. The painter tilted the head back against the chair, letting eyes remain closed. The rain's rhythm sensed with breath. In, out, in, out. Inhalation carried warmth, exhalation released tension. With each cycle, the body and mind sank further, deeper into stillness. The blanket shifted slightly with a small stretch of the legs. Even this movement was unhurried, deliberate in its softness. It was a gentle reminder that the body could remain flexible without disturbance. The painter allowed a small smile of awareness, acknowledging the subtle perfection of this quiet night. Through the painted glass, the storm continued to morph the outside world. Street lamps became glowing orbs. Rain flowing across pavement turned into rivers of gold and silver. Trees and rooftops shifted in blurred contours. Even the occasional passing pedestrian was softened, indistinct, part of the overall calm landscape. The painter's awareness floated across these images without effort. There was no need to track, no need to judge, no need to name anything. The world had been reduced to rhythm, color, and soft motion, a space entirely suitable for rest. A faint draft brushed the painter's cheek from the slightly open window. The air smelled of rain, earth, and distant stone. It was cool, but comforting, like a whisper that gently reminded the senses of the world beyond the studio. It was a quiet invitation to drift, a soft nudge towards sleep. The painter's mind no longer constructed thoughts in sequences. Instead, each impression, warmth, light, sound, weight, melted into the next, creating a seamless flow of sensation. There were no worries, no planning, no effort, only existence, only gentle awareness, only calm. Time became unmeasured. Minutes dissolved into hours. The painter no longer distinguished between outside and inside, storm and studio. Everything merged into a single, quiet experience, a safe harbor of warmth, soft light, and steady, endless rhythm. Even breathing felt guided by something larger than self. Inhale brought calm. Exhale released remnants of tension. The body settled into a state so complete, so quiet, that the mind could follow without direction, slipping softly into a liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. The windows glowed faintly, holding every motion of the storm in softened layers. The painted glass diffused every reflection, every shadow, every tiny variation of light. Nothing appeared sharp, nothing demanded recognition. It was all part of the quiet orchestration of the night, a lullaby of color, motion, and warmth. The painter's hands rested open, relaxed, legs stretched under the blanket, weight evenly distributed. Even the smallest muscles of the face relaxed, forehead smooth, jaw loose, lips soft. The body no longer needed to remind itself how to be still. It simply existed in the gentle embrace of the studio, the storm, and the night. A soft sigh escaped the painter's lips. It was not fatigue, not exhale from effort, but a sigh of ease, a release into the infinite calm around them. The storm outside continued. The windows held light, the shadows drifted, and the night itself seemed to extend a quiet hand, guiding the painter towards sleep without urgency or demand. Thoughts were gone entirely now, leaving only sensation and rhythm. The painter felt as though the studio storm and self had become one. Breath, heartbeat, rain, and soft light pulsed together in harmony. The mind and body were ready, fully prepared to enter the state they had been easing into all night. Outside, the storm continued its gentle, tireless work, rain falling in softened lines, mist rising from wet pavement, leaves dripping in steady rhythm. Inside, the painted windows reflected this serenity, folding layers of night into the room. Everything converged into the perfect lull, a space where sleep could arrive naturally, without effort, without hesitation. The painter surrendered fully, sinking deeper into the chair, body cradled by warmth, blanket, and chair. Breathing slowed further. Awareness softened completely. The storm, the painted windows, the quiet studio, everything became a gentle current, carrying the painter into dreams, calm, and restorative rest. In this seamless transition, Part 5 concluded its gentle work. The studio, storm, and painted light had guided the painter into the threshold of sleep. The night was complete in its care. The storm faithful, the studio protective, and the painter finally at ease. Drifting fully into night, the studio was quiet now, perfectly still, holding the weight of the night without any demand. Even the storm outside had softened to a gentle whisper. Rain falling in steady, familiar lines that blurred the world beyond the glass. It was a lullaby written in water and light, a song of calm that wrapped around the room like a soft blanket. The painter rested fully in the chair, body heavy but comfortable, wrapped in warmth and quiet. Every muscle was released, every thought gently dissolved. There was nothing left to do, nowhere to go, no questions left unanswered. The studio itself seemed to breathe along with them, the painted windows glowing softly, the light scattering into pools of gentle amber and silver across walls and floor. Outside, rain slid slowly down glass panes, tracing invisible paths that shimmered in the muted glow. The motion was slow, almost imperceptible, yet endlessly comforting. It reminded the painter, and now you listening, that the world continues gently, steadily, even when we close our eyes. Each drop had its rhythm, each movement its space, and all of it existed without haste or expectation. Breathe in and feel the calm. Breathe out and let everything else go. The blanket rests across your legs as warmth spreads through your body. Every sound, every shadow, every soft glow of light carries no urgency, only reassurance, only ease. The storm outside no longer rumbles or insists. It simply sings in soft tones, echoing the pulse of your breath, matching the steady rhythm of your heart. The painted windows, once a canvas of careful work and intention, now glow as if aware of your rest. They soften light, filter the night, and create a cocoon of safety and serenity. Through them, the world becomes gentle. Shapes shift without pressure. Colors blur without notice, and the storm becomes a companion, not a force. Let your thoughts drift like rain along the glass. There is no need to hold them, no need to chase. Each passing image, each fleeting idea can fade as easily as a droplet falling from leaf to pavement. You are supported. You are held. You are at ease. Feel your body sink deeper into comfort. Shoulders soften. Arms rest heavy. Legs release. Head tilts slightly. Perfectly aligned, supported. The quiet surrounds you inside and out. The warmth, the rhythm, the glow all flow together, guiding you gently towards sleep. Now, allow your mind to wander in the softest way, like light across the painted windows. No sharp edges, no questions, no tension. Only calm, only motion that soothes. Only night that carries you into rest. And with each breath, each quiet sigh, each heartbeat in tune with the steady storm, you drift deeper, deeper into a gentle sleep that holds you tenderly, easily, completely. The studio, the storm, the painted light, they remain. You are safe. You are calm. You are ready, and now, without effort, without thought, you let yourself go fully, peacefully into dreams.